Hello, my name is Spencer and welcome to my hobby channel where I paint miniature dioramas to help with my overactive imagination. Today, I'm going to return to the world of Mund and tell another tale. I had this WizKids guard in my pile of shame, and he jumped out as me as something I was just really excited to work on painting today. So, the overall diorama will be this guard guarding something. I know, incredibly clever. For the overall color scheme, I'll stick with the Kingdom of Regaby. The Kingdom of Regaby is loosely based off of English soldiers from the 100 Years' War, since those were the first miniatures I painted up in that style. So their primary colors are red, a little bit of a tan yellow, and metallic colors. For this guard, who I'll now refer to moving forward as Ewan, I wanted to keep the original tan and red colors pretty much the standard color scheme, but then I also wanted to give him a few specialty colors to potentially signify that he, in his special role as a guard of guarding something important, he gets some specialty markings as well. So he'll end up getting some more leather markings than usual and tin colors. You can expect to see more WizKids miniatures painting and just various miniatures paintings all over the place, since one of my main goals for 2026 is to work through my pile of shame, as it currently is a giant box in the corner of my very small 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment. I always do the classic purchasing more models than I have time in the day to paint, so trying to get through all my practice models, like these WizKids ones, will just be good practice and an opportunity for me to incorporate more storytelling into the Tales of Mund series. I also picked up a large wave of Black Friday projects, so I'm really stacking up 2026 to be a project-heavy year, even though I am going to be getting married and preparing to move into a larger space soon as well. But anyway, moving back to Ewan, I wanted his colors to primarily be the Vallejo Tinny Tin color, Vallejo Bloody Red color, and the Vallejo Barbarian Skin colors. Everything else was just kind of a momentary decision to try out a new color palette, like the toxic yellow undershirt that I gave him. I like to think that Ewan is in his mid or early 30s, and is fairly well respected in his community, as his primary objective is to guard a relic of the land that helps make their crop yields more fruitful. Overall, I really like the WizKids miniatures for what they are. Pretty easy to paint, pretty well detailed enough to service what I'm trying to go for. And they're also cheap and readily available around my area. But I think that they're great practice for me to work on new techniques, new palettes, just better brush control as a whole, before I move on to any more expensive plastics like 40K or Star Wars Legion or larger diorama pieces that I want to pursue. For this project, for Ewan specifically, I really wanted to work on my layering abilities. I sometimes don't always have the best eye for choosing colors to stand out on top of other colors, but this reddish brown and the red cloak specifically, I knew going into this project were going to be specifically good practice opportunities for me to try to catch the light on his tunic and his... I actually don't know what that thing around his neck would be called. But either way, just kind of working on improving as a painter as a whole was kind of my goal for Ewan for this project. Another goal for this project was storytelling. With two guards, it's not necessarily the most difficult story to come up with that they're guarding something. But these models have been speaking to me for a while now, and I really wanted to paint them up. So for this diorama, I wanted to put Ewan in a magical forest to guard an artifact kind of vibe, where the kingdom always has a guard out front to protect this artifact that benefits the kingdom. And then, in a future project, I'll be able to use the other guard I got to portray the same scene, but like a different time of year, kind of practice my skills being able to recreate what I did, but then change small details to make it seem like, oh, this one took place in spring and this one took place in fall, you know? Ultimately, I have seen a lot of growth in me as a miniature painter and diorama storyteller, whatever you want to call it. But Ewan here just made me really happy, and I'm very satisfied with how he came out as a whole. I knew that Erwin was going to be in a forest, so I tried to paint his spear like it would match the trees around it. So for that, I used a Vallejo old wood, and then I put an express color on top of it of a willow bark. One of my favorite express paints that I own. I use it on almost every wooden item that I have access to. And this was also how I painted the trees in the diorama in the later parts of this video. And then I got some practice with some detailing, using some darker leathers and some nice fine line metalwork for the belt buckles. Once Erwin was done, I could then move on to the base of this diorama. I'm trying to be a little bit more thoughtful and calculated with my diorama making, so this time I marked out where I wanted everything to be. Ultimately, the vision was 5 gnarled trees surrounding a podium with a little path leading up to it, and Ewan would be defending the path. For this diorama, I saw this really cool technique of making miniature trees online recently that I really wanted to try out. Pretty much, you take a bunch of floral wiring, cut strips of it, roll it into a intertwined snake kind of looking thing, and then twist it together after bending it in half. And then you take time and patience unraveling each of the parts that stick out of the top to make some fairly convincing looking larger branches that then splinter into tiny branches. For the roots, this hurt my hand a lot more, but you take the loop out and you pull it into little strips and then you twist them really hard, so I had to use a pair of pliers for that. But once I had a proof of concept for the first tree, I then could go in with some watered down glue to make sure it didn't come apart. However, that didn't really reduce the amount of the twisted wire, so I added some liquid latex to the outside of the entirety of the tree. Off camera, made 4 other trees just because my hands hurt and I didn't want to do it on camera. And I painted one up as a test just to see if I was on the right track, and then I stuck them all down once I was happy with them, with their latex, with their overall design as well. While the trees are drying to the base, we can move to the stone altar that serves as the centerpiece for this diorama. I used a piece of scrap XPS foam I had lying around. I used a stencil, and then I cut out as much of a perfect circle as I could with my X-Acto knife in order to give it a nice stony circular vibe. I then cut out another smaller but identical circle to put on top just to give the altar some much needed elevation. To texture it, I used a piece of crumpled up aluminum foil and I smushed it into all the XPS foam. And then I glued the 2 pieces of the altar together. Once the altar was done, I then just glued it into place in between the trees, and then I moved on to creating a texture paste using Sculptamold, and I just used my gloved hand to spread that around the base, and then I also used some water and isopropyl alcohol to smooth it out a little bit more to make it look less like rocky terrain and a little bit more like soil. I then sealed in the XPS foam with some Mod Podge protect it during the spray painting phase. I also wanted to do a bit of a experiment comparing some technical Citadel paint with some Monument Hobbies texture paste. And so for half the diorama base, I use Sterling Mud, and for the other half of the base, I use some fine gray earth texture paste. Overall, I do think the texture paste provides more of a sandy, gritty look than the mud texture paste does, so I will probably use these separately. Once everything has been covered with some amount of variety of texture, I then glued down some fine flock all over the Pro Acryl Rocky texture paste in order to give this a nice fall color scheme. Once I gave it a beat to dry, I then knocked off all the excess and came in and cleaned it up with my little vacuum. Then I could start priming the base of the diorama. I just chose to actually use my airbrush inside just because I felt like it'd be easier to get to the undersides of the trees with it. But then it would also be easier just to go straight into painting the trees and the terrain using the airbrush in the same session. I painted the trees in the exact same way that I painted the spear on Ewan, as a way to kind of tie the miniature into the overall base as a whole. I started with some dark brown layers to give it that nice dusty soil, but then I came in with a dark green for the grass, and then I slowly built various shades of yellow and red to get it into a dried, grassy fall color scheme. I chose fall for this diorama simply because it would very easily help the viewers see the altar in the middle, and it's cold outside, and when I was working on this project, I really just enjoyed the colors and I wanted to try and recreate that to the best of my ability. I didn't want the stone altar to necessarily get hidden in the dirt, so I did come in and I hit it with a stonewall gray color from Vallejo, and then I also applied a brown wash over the top of it. I also applied the brown wash to the entirety of the soil to hopefully, again, just make the diorama look as uniform as possible. I also decided to use some of my favorite basing pigments for this diorama, and I used some brown earth for the area around the altar to make it seem like the soil around the altar might have a few more nutrients, and then the dry earth on the outskirts. I could have stopped at this point with this diorama, however, I felt like it needed a little bit more visual variety. So again, going back to my discussion about going through my pile of shame and all the resources that I have around my house that I'm not using, I came in and added a bunch of brown tufts to the entirety of the base, and then I dry brushed some of the gray back out from the diorama. I then wanted to really cement the fall colors with some nice foliage. I went to my local tea store and got some yellow tea leaves that I then ground up to a fine powder. Unfortunately, these do have turmeric in it, so now this is a scented diorama. But I just threw down a bunch over the top of the diorama. I went in and picked out any that didn't look like they fit very well, and then I sprayed down some watered down white glue over the entirety of the diorama to get the pieces to stick. For the centerpiece of the diorama, I found this bit from one of my Age of Sigmar boxes, and it called to me to serve as a bit of a artifact for the area. For this artifact, I needed to create a little podium out of sculpting clay. Effectively, for this podium, the vision is that when this artifact remains on top of the podium, Remont's agricultural yields will be higher than the previous years. So, the kingdom made a group consensus to have a guard posted at all times so that no one would steal this artifact to hurt Regaby. Overall, for painting this artifact, I took a very similar approach to the stone altar. It is just a gray prime, gray paint, a brown wash on the stone altar part, and then a dot of white and fluorescent green in the middle of the artifact to make it seem more ethereal. But once we have everybody painted up, we can free Ewan from his base, attach him, and then paint the sides black, and we can move on to some glamour shots. I'd like to take this moment to say thank you to each of you who stayed through to the end of the video. This hobby really provides me an escape from reality that I really need, and I like sharing it with you all. I'm not a professional, but I really enjoy sharing my learning process with you all and trying out new techniques I see here and there. I'll make more videos like these, tell more tales, make more projects, and if you want to keep up with it, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. But I'll be back soon, I promise. And until then, take care, and I hope you all have an excellent week. See you around.